Yesterday, we spoke to two men who say they may have been some of Jeffrey Dahmer's very first victims. They say the Netflix series Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer Story, made them physically ill, and that what people watched as pure entertainment was a hell they did not want to relive. The surviving victims of Jeffrey Dahmer and the family members of those he killed want the world to know what the man they say was an evil monster was really like, not the Hollywood version. Today, we'll go inside the mind of a serial killer and hear the truth about who he really was from his very own father and stepmother, speaking out in a never-before-aired interview. Bob, when you look at this and other series, Manhunter and things where they really dig into killers, serial killers, what do you think the impact of that is on the general population that consumes that through their television?
Well, I think, and it's so hard to talk about this after hearing the stories of people who survived actual encounters. But I think we have to make a distinction between the people these stories are about and regular people's interest in those stories. I don't think it means that we are sick as a population to be fascinated by stories like these. We go through life with an idea of what's ideal, the way the world should be. And when we encounter the real heart of darkness, something that completely goes against anything that we think is right in humanity, in the world, it is fascinating. And I think there's a difference between the people who make these, the people who watch them, and the people for whom they're about, that we have to be careful we keep that distinction clear.
Do you guys in the audience, do you learn something from watching some of these shows? Okay, right over here.
I'm a huge fan of true crime and Candace's shows as well. I watched 2 or 3 episodes of the Dahmer, and I could not watch it anymore. Mm-hmm. I've seen all of the other true crime series, and for some reason, this one really affected me, and I could not watch the entire series. I felt for the victims. It was just so disturbing. I could not watch.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Phil. How are you?
Hello, Dr. Phil.
Good to meet you, sir. How would you describe Jeffrey as a youngster when you were growing up?
Excuse me, doctor, if you don't mind. We don't know. We don't relate to Jeffrey.
Okay, Jeff.
He's Jeff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me ask you some things that, and I think these are right and accurate from your book. I understand that hindsight is 20/20, so I'm sure that these things will look different now. But Jeff was fascinated with a rotting animal carcass under the house and played with the bones and referred to them as fiddlesticks.
It was a terrible smell, so I went underneath and cleaned it out, the smell of the skunk, and cleaned out whatever else was under, cans and bones, and collected them all. And Jeff did seem to exhibit an interest in the way they clanked as he picked them up and put them back into the metal pail. He just laughed at it, the sound of it, and that was it.
It was said that he had even impaled a dog's head on a stick. And this, again, is something you only learned about in the trial.
The trial. I asked him about that, and he said that it was back in the woods, 2 neighbors away from us. I saw a picture of it.
So he admitted that that was true.
He said he found this dog. I don't know if it's really true, to be honest with you, but he told me that he found this dog that he decapitated and put on a stake.
And do you believe that there were warning signs that as a father you should have seen? If your kid is going around collecting dead animals, cutting them open and exploring them and that sort of thing, how do you not know that?
Well, as I said, it's heavily wooded, very rough terrain, and there are a lot of hiding places. He was extremely secretive and devious.
Candace, what's your reaction to how they're describing him and his early behavior?
Considering what eventually happened and what they became aware of that he did as an adult, then looking back, certainly if it were me, my gosh, why didn't I do something? That is not normal for an 8, 9, 10-year-old boy to be fascinated with dead animals, body parts, laughing when they dropped at the sound of a bone clanking when it's dropped. I know you know this, Phil, the 3 big red flags: fire setting for the purpose of enjoying the fire, not just playing with matches, bedwetting, and I don't mean an occasional accident. I mean, sometimes we know that troubled teens may have what's called enuresis, the clinical term, bedwetting, several times in a night. And then the third and the most severe is animal torture. So fire setting, bedwetting, animal getting, what we say in the profiling world. And if any of those things are going on, don't encourage it and get the child into therapy.
Tell me about the locked wooden box that you confronted him about.
On several occasions, my mother had complained about seeing some pornography around. So when I made the visit to Milwaukee, I saw this box in the closet in his room. I said, I'm going to open it. And I started going down to the basement to get a tool to open up the box. And he kept complaining that he couldn't even have 1 foot square of his own property to do with what he wants. And I said, I'm going to open it anyway, find out what's in here. Because that's what I thought it was, something related to pornography. And in fact, he convinced me to just wait till tomorrow, Dad, he said. And I'll open it for you then, but just don't do anything now. I don't want to disturb Grandma, because she was in a nearby room and she heard all this commotion that I was going through with Jeff. And so I'm in a way I'm glad, but in a way I'm not glad that I didn't press it, because if I would have opened that box and found what was in there, I think I would have lost it. Then the next day he opened it and he said, see, this is what it was. And in fact, he had stuffed some pornographic magazines in there.
But we now know the box contained a human head.
Yes.
And
it would have stopped. And I said, well, what would you have done, Jeff, if I had opened it? And he said something like, the jig would have been up. Just something non-emotional, non-committal. More lives would have been saved.
So, Bob, this is straight from a horror genre script, right?
Yes, this is very much a horror movie kind of thing. The big difference is, in horror movies, whether it's Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger or whoever, they kill fictional people, and those fictional people have fictional relatives. Here, we've got a story which has affected all kinds of people who are still alive and who are still able to see this. I would say one quick thing we haven't mentioned yet, that as much as, and glamorizing almost always happens, especially with a 10-part show, but this film actually does make at least some concerted efforts to talk about some things that I think the other Dahmer movies and others haven't. And that is this idea of, how did he keep getting away with this? Why were the police responses to people who kept calling as bad as they were? When the Reverend Jackson, or the actor that plays Reverend Jackson, comes in the last half of this series, we do begin to get those arguments of policing issues, of underserved communities. And by the time this whole thing is over, I think some consciousness has been raised about how something like this was allowed to happen 17 times over.
how old was he when his mother left and took his brother?
Just turned 18.
What effect do you think it had when she left and took his brother but not him?
Sherry and I came upon our house, and Jeff was there all alone. And Jeff looked like an abandoned animal. Or how would you describe it?
Well, he was forlorn.
Yeah.
He stated later that he felt totally, it's the first time he felt so lonely. That's when he went out looking for someone to stay with him. He was so lonely.
That was the
He
first
felt
murder.
abandoned with
We
the hill.
didn't know he was left alone. And he had already done this first murder. He apparently felt so alone that he picked up this hitchhiker. And when this hitchhiker wanted to leave, he wanted him to stay so badly, he hit him with a barbell. And I kind of think that it was more of an accident than an intentional, thought-out killing.
I believe serial killers are created. You have to have the perfect storm to create it. I don't think you're necessarily born a serial killer.
He didn't make those choices for Jeffrey, and he didn't, you know, I don't think if he was gonna check a box about what he wanted his son to become, he would do that. But you have to be incredibly naive and then start framing stuff up in a real dysfunctional way. Clearly, this is a phenomenon. True crime is a fascination of people. Is this all bad, or is there an upside to it?
I do not think it's all bad. There is an upside, and the upside, I believe, is there's something for potential victims to learn, listening to these stories, watching these stories. Let's put the glorification over here. What can be learned? And when I was a young, very young psychiatric nurse in my 20s, and I worked in maximum security at Northwestern University Hospital. And I found myself one day sitting across the table from a young man, a teenager, who had been admitted to our unit for 30 days of observation and treatment. He had murdered his mother. I wanted to know what in the world could have been going on in his life with his mother, the one person in the world to whom he was dependent on finances, love, housing, everything, and he murdered her. What went on there? What was wrong in that relationship? And I thought, the more I knew about him and how that happened, then I would be able to handle things like that in my future. Not that I'm concerned about killing my mother, of course, but there were other patients through the years that were on the unit because they did something horrible to another person. And I thought, the more I knew about them, why they act that way, why they did it, how they did it, how did they get away with it, I thought I would be personally safe for myself if I ever encountered anyone like that.
You know, one of the things I've talked about before is, you know, we're raised to give people the benefit of the doubt. And I've always said that's insane to me that you give people the benefit of the doubt. You collect data, and when you have enough to make an informed decision, you make the informed decision. And what you're saying is this alerts people to the fact that there's a makeup for these kind of people, and you learn by watching what they do, how they do it, how they manipulate, how they control, all of those sort of things. And if you can look through all the television magic and look at the patterns, there is some instruction there that people can learn from. Do you have a story or a question for me? Click the link in the description and tell me what in the world is going on.